You've probably felt it, that quiet, uncomfortable moment when you realize you don't want to see anyone today. Not because something terrible happened, not because you're angry or hurt, just because the idea of conversation feels heavy. You look at your phone and see messages from people you genuinely care about, people who've done nothing wrong, and yet you can't bring yourself to reply with any real energy. You scroll through invitations to gatherings that once excited you, and now they feel like obligations wrapped in noise. You sit alone in your room, or you walk through your day mechanically, and there's this strange absence inside you, like someone turned down the volume on everything that used to matter. It's not sadness exactly, not the kind that makes you cry or reach out for help. It's more like a fade, a slow drain of color from things that used to be vivid. And the worst part is that you can't explain it to anyone, not even to yourself. Because on paper your life might look fine, your responsibilities are being met, your basic needs are covered, and yet something fundamental has shifted, and you're left standing in the middle of your own existence, wondering why nothing feels the way it used to. You catch yourself going through entire days on autopilot, smiling when you're supposed to smile, nodding when you're supposed to agree, but underneath all of it there's this persistent, hollow feeling, like you're watching your own life happen from behind glass, present but not really participating, aware but not really engaged. The things that used to give you a sense of purpose or direction now seem arbitrary, almost silly, like rules to a game you suddenly realize you never actually wanted to play in the first place. And then the questions start. The quiet, relentless questions that visit you in the early hours, or during long commutes, or in the middle of a conversation you're pretending to care about. Am I depressed? Is there something chemically wrong with me? Have I become cold, detached, incapable of feeling the way other people seem to feel so effortlessly? You watch people laugh at things that barely register as amusing to you. You see them get excited about plans and purchases and small victories, and you wonder if you've lost some essential part of being human. Maybe I'm broken, you think. Maybe I've become arrogant without realizing it, disconnected because I think I'm above the simple pleasures everyone else enjoys. Maybe I'm turning into one of those people who's too cynical, too analytical, too stuck in their own head to actually participate in life. Or worse, maybe I never really felt things deeply in the first place, and I'm only now realizing how emotionally shallow I've always been. The fear creeps in that this emptiness is permanent, that you've crossed some invisible threshold, and there's no going back to the version of yourself who could lose themselves in a movie, who could feel genuine excitement about a Friday night, who could connect with another person without this strange glass wall between you and them. You start to wonder if you're becoming a ghost in your own life, present but not really there, going through motions while some vital spark has been extinguished and no one around you has noticed yet, but they will, and then you'll have to face the truth that something inside you has fundamentally died. You compare yourself to who you were a year ago, 5 years ago, and the contrast is jarring, because that person seemed to feel things more intensely, seemed to care more deeply, seemed to be more alive in ways you can't quite access anymore, and you can't tell if you've evolved or devolved, grown wiser or just grown numb, and that uncertainty itself becomes another source of quiet terror. But here's what almost no one tells you. What gets lost in all the self-help noise and the clinical language and the rush to pathologize every uncomfortable human experience. What you're going through might not be a breakdown at all. It might be the exact opposite. It might be the first real moment of clarity you've had in years, maybe ever. Because what if that absence you're feeling, that strange emotional distance from things that used to captivate you, isn't a loss of your ability to feel, but a loss of your ability to be fooled? What if your mind has simply stopped accepting the same old stimuli, the same recycled narratives, the same borrowed dreams that culture and habit and social conditioning have been feeding you since childhood? What if you're not becoming cold, but becoming lucid? This shift, this uncomfortable in-between space you're occupying, it's not a malfunction, it's a transition. And transitions, by their very nature, feel like endings before they reveal themselves as beginnings. You're not watching yourself die. You're watching an old version of yourself become obsolete, and your consciousness hasn't quite caught up with the architecture of what's being built in its place. The discomfort you're experiencing isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that something has gone right, that some part of you has finally refused to keep pretending, has finally stopped participating in performances that no longer serve who you actually are. Think about it. For how many years have you been running on programming that wasn't even yours, pursuing goals that were handed to you, measuring yourself against standards you never chose, finding meaning in places you were told to look rather than places that actually resonate with who you are beneath all the conditioning. Think of it like this. For most of your life, you've been watching a play, a really convincing one with elaborate sets and compelling characters, and a plot that kept you engaged. You laughed when you were supposed to laugh. You felt tension during the dramatic moments. You invested in the outcomes because the whole production was designed to make you invest. But then one day, maybe without warning, maybe gradually, you started noticing the edges of the set, the seams in the backdrop, the way the actors pause just slightly before delivering their lines. You began to see the stage for what it is, a construction, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. The play continues, the other audience members are still fully absorbed, but you're sitting there aware that it's a performance, and that awareness changes everything. It doesn't mean the play is bad or that you're superior for noticing. It just means you've shifted into a different mode of perception, and that mode doesn't allow you to lose yourself in the illusion the way you used to. The things that once excited you, the goals that seemed important, the relationships that felt meaningful, they haven't necessarily changed, but your relationship to them has, because you're no longer experiencing them through the filter of unconscious participation. You're seeing them more clearly, more directly, and clarity, especially when it first arrives, can feel a lot like emptiness. Another way to think about it is like waking from a dream that was so immersive you forgot it was a dream. And those first moments after waking, when the dream logic is fading but the real world hasn't fully come into focus yet, that's where you are right now, in that disorienting transition between two states of consciousness, and it makes sense that it feels unstable, uncertain, even frightening. Or imagine you've been wearing glasses with a specific tint your entire life, and you didn't even know they were tinted because you've never taken them off. And then one day they crack, and you see through the crack a version of reality that's somehow different. And suddenly you can't ignore that what you've been seeing might not be the whole picture, might not even be accurate, and that realizity, on that first glimpse of something beyond your established framework, it doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels destabilizing, disorienting, like the ground beneath you has turned to water. And this is where the real discomfort lives, in this gap between who you were and who you're becoming. Because the old pleasures don't work anymore, but the new ones haven't fully formed yet. You're standing in a kind of psychological no man's land, where the dopamine hits that used to sustain you, the social validation, the achievement markers, the entertainment, the busyness, all of it has lost its grip on you, but you haven't yet discovered what comes next. This is the phase where people panic, where they assume something is wrong and rush to fix themselves, to medicate the discomfort, to force themselves back into enthusiasm for things they've outgrown. But what if the discomfort is exactly what's supposed to happen? What if this void-like feeling is just your system recalibrating, clearing out old dependencies, old ways of seeking meaning that no longer serve the person you're becoming? You've heard people talk about outgrowing friendships or jobs, but rarely do we talk about outgrowing entire modes of being, entire frameworks of what makes life feel worthwhile. And when that happens, when your consciousness expands past the boundaries of its old container, there's going to be a period where you feel unmoored, where nothing seems to fit right, where you can't go back to who you were, but you don't yet know how to inhabit who you're becoming. Think of a snake shedding its skin. There's a vulnerable period where the old skin is too tight and restrictive, but the new skin underneath hasn't fully hardened yet, and during that time the snake is more exposed, more uncomfortable, less protected. But this vulnerability is necessary for growth, and trying to skip it or rush through it only damages the process. Your psyche is doing something similar. It's letting go of structures that no longer fit, beliefs that no longer hold, identities that no longer serve, and it hasn't yet built the new structures to replace them. And that's okay. That's actually necessary, because you can't build something new while you're still clinging to the old. You have to go through this period of dissolution, of not knowing, of empty space before anything genuinely new can emerge. The loneliness during this time is real, and it's important to name it, to stop pretending it's something else. You feel alone because, in a very real sense, you are alone. Not because no one loves you or because you're uniquely isolated, but because you're going through an experience that can't be shared in the usual ways. You can't explain to most people why their excitement feels foreign to you now, why their concerns seem almost quaint, why the things that dominate their attention feel like background noise in your awareness. And this creates distance, not out of judgment necessarily, but out of sheer incompatibility of experience. You're speaking a different language now, operating from a different baseline, and most conversations feel like trying to describe color to someone who's only ever seen in grayscale. So yes, you withdraw, not because you're depressed or antisocial, but because participation in the old scripts feels inauthentic, and you're not yet fluent enough in your new understanding to build connections from this different ground. This phase, this quiet isolation, it's not a failure of character. It's a necessary pause, a kind of emotional molting where you have to be still and alone, while something old falls away and something new hardens into place. Fighting it, forcing yourself to be social or enthusiastic or engaged before you're ready, that's like interrupting a metamorphosis and wondering why you can't fly yet. The emptiness you feel when you're alone isn't a void that needs to be filled with distraction or noise. It's a spaciousness that's allowing something new to emerge and learning to sit with it, to tolerate it without rushing to make it go away. That's actually one of the most important skills you can develop during this transition. This is the period where you learn that you can be alone without being lonely, that you can be quiet without being empty, that you can withdraw from the noise without disappearing entirely, and that sometimes the most profound growth happens not in moments of connection and activity, but in moments of solitude and stillness, in the spaces between, in the gaps where nothing is happening and you're just there with yourself, raw and unfiltered and uncertain, learning who you actually are when you're not performing for anyone, not even for yourself. But here's the part that needs to be said clearly, without cushioning. This awareness, this shift in consciousness, it doesn't make you better than anyone. It doesn't make you enlightened or evolved or special. It just makes you different in this particular moment, and difference isn't superiority. There's a real trap here, one that's easy to fall into when you start seeing through patterns that others are still living inside of. The trap is arrogance, the quiet conviction that you've figured something out, that makes you fundamentally wiser or more awake than the people around you. And that's dangerous, not just because it's isolating, but because it's another illusion, just a more subtle one. The ego is incredibly adaptive, and it will take this new awareness and turn it into a new identity, a new way to feel separate and superior, and before you know it, you're not free from the performance, you're just playing a different role, the role of the person who's above it all. Watch for this. Watch for the moments when you feel contempt for people who still care about things you've moved past, when you dismiss their joys as shallow or their concerns as trivial. That contempt is a warning sign that you've traded one prison for another. True clarity doesn't make you cold or judgmental. It makes you more compassionate, because you understand that everyone is operating from their own level of awareness, doing the best they can with the light they have. If this shift is making you harder, more cynical, more disconnected from basic human warmth, then you're not waking up. You're just building new walls and calling them wisdom. The mark of genuine understanding isn't that you feel superior to others. It's that you feel more connected to the fundamental humanity in everyone, more aware of how difficult it is to be conscious in a world that constantly pulls us toward unconsciousness, more gentle with yourself and others for all the times we fall back into old patterns, because growth isn't linear and awareness isn't a perm, an end state you achieve once and keep forever. The people who are still engaged with things you've moved past, they're not asleep or unaware or less evolved. They're just at a different point in their own journey, and your journey doesn't invalidate theirs any more than theirs invalidates yours. And the moment you start thinking it does, the moment you start feeling separate and superior because of your awareness, that's the moment you've Tura. Ned insight into ego and wisdom into pride. So what comes next? After the emptiness, after the isolation, after the disorientation of leaving behind the old ways of being? Not a sudden explosion of joy, not a dramatic transformation into some idealized version of yourself, but something quieter, something more sustainable. You start to notice that pleasure still exists, but it's different now, less loud, less dependent on external stimulation, more rooted in simple presence. A conversation can matter again, but not because you're performing in it or getting validation from it, just because there's a real exchange happening between two aware people. Work can feel meaningful again, not because it's building towards some grand achievement, but because the doing of it aligns with something true in you. Relationships can deepen, not through intensity or drama, but through the kind of honesty that only becomes possible when you stop needing the other person to complete you, or distract you, or prove something about you. The world doesn't become more exciting in the conventional sense. It becomes more real, And reality, when you're actually present to it, has a richness that no amount of artificial stimulation can match. This doesn't mean every day feels profound or that you walk around in some state of Zen contentment. It means you've stopped needing life to be something other than what it is. And in that acceptance, there's a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand recognition, just sits there quietly in the background of your days, available whenever you remember to notice it. You might find yourself appreciating things you used to overlook. The way morning light falls across your room, the texture of silence, the simple fact of being alive without needing that aliveness to be extraordinary or meaningful in some cosmic sense. Just alive here now, and that being enough. Ow. And that. Food tastes like food again instead of just fuel or distraction. Music can move you, but in a different way. Less about escape and more about resonance. Conversations can feel nourishing when they're with people who are actually present, and solitude can feel restorative rather than punishing. And none of this is dramatic or impressive. It's just real, just present, just here. And maybe that's the real shift, the one that nobody warns you about because it doesn't make for a good story. You don't end up enlightened or fixed or finally happy in the way the culture promises happiness. You just end up more honest, more grounded, more capable of sitting with reality without needing to escape it or enhance it or explain it away. The things that used to seem important fade, but not into bitterness, just into perspective. The things that actually matter become clearer, not because they're more dramatic, but because they're more true. You stop waiting for your life to start, stop searching for the missing piece that will finally make everything make sense, and you realize that this, right here, this quiet, unglamorous, sometimes uncomfortable existence, this is it, and it's enough. Not because you've resigned yourself to mediocrity, but because you finally understood that the search itself was the distraction. Happiness stops being this thing you're chasing in the future and becomes something simpler, something closer to contentment, a baseline okayness with what is, rather than a constant striving for what could be. And pleasure, real pleasure, not the manufactured kind that comes from consumption or achievement, but the kind that emerges from being fully present to your own experience, that starts showing up in unexpected moments, not because you've earned it, or because everything in your life has finally aligned, but because you've stopped being numb, stopped buffering yourself from direct contact with reality. And when you're actually here, actually present, life has a way of revealing its texture, its depth, its strange, quiet beauty that was always there, but that you were too distracted to notice. The shift is subtle, almost imperceptible. You don't wake up one day transformed, you just start noticing that you're less bothered by things that used to disturb you, less impressed by things that used to excite you, less desperate for things that used to seem essential, and more grounded in a kind of basic steadiness that doesn't depend on external circumstances aligning perfectly. So if you're in that strange space right now, that hollow, confusing in-between place where nothing feels quite right, and you can't figure out what's wrong with you, consider the possibility that nothing is wrong. Consider that you're just finally, maybe for the first time, starting to see clearly, and that clarity, before it becomes comfortable, feels a lot like loss. Let it be loss. Let it be uncomfortable. Let yourself be alone with it without rushing to fix it or fill it or make it mean something terrible about who you are. Because on the other side of this, not far from where you are now, there's a version of you that doesn't need the noise anymore, doesn't need the performance, doesn't need to be anyone other than exactly who you are. And that person, quiet and unglamorous as they might be, is more free than you've ever been. This freedom won't look like what you expected. It won't feel like victory or arrival or finally having it all figured out. It will feel more like relief, like you can finally stop pretending, stop performing, stop trying to be the person you thought you were supposed to be, and just exist as you actually are, which is messier and quieter and less impressive than the image you've been maintaining, but also more real, more solid, more yours. And in that realness, in that unspectacular authenticity, there's a kind of joy that doesn't need anything from you, doesn't require you to be better or different or more than you are, just asks you to be present, to be honest, to be here, and discovers that here, despite everything, despite the confusion and the loneliness and the fear that you've lost something essential, here is actually exactly where you need to be, not because here is perfect or because you've arrived at some final destination, but because here is real, here is now. Here is the only place where life actually happens. and learning to be here fully, without wishing you were somewhere else or someone else. That's not resignation. That's not giving up. That's actually the beginning of something genuine, something that doesn't promise to fix you, or complete you, or make you into someone extraordinary, but something that allows you to be ordinary, in the most profound sense, to be human without apology, to be yourself without performance, and to find in that simple, unadorned existence a quality of peace that all the striving and seeking and trying to be more than you are could never provide.